Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to start in a few minutes. Just going to wait just a couple of minutes to get everybody with us today. So in the meantime, if you want to let us know where you're from, you can put that into the chat box. We can take a few minutes to look at that and see all your answers. So that'd be great. So we're excited about this. We're thrilled to have such a large group too, actually. We have over 100 people registered for this program. So as you're joining us, you're with good company. And we had a nice day out there. Hopefully everyone got outside and enjoyed some of their gardening activities as the fall is really coming just down the road, as I see, from the weatherman. So I think it's going to be, this might be the last really warm day. So, everybody doing okay?
Yep.
Good.
Yes, so far so good.
Great. So I have just another minute or so, and then we'll kick it off.
Wow, somebody from Nebraska.
Wow, really? I should check that out.
Awesome.
All right, Nancy from Nebraska and Joe from Bellport. Welcome. Okay. Well, I guess we probably can start. We have a lot to cover today, and each of our panelists has a lot to say and share with you, and we have a wonderful moderator. So why don't we get started? Okay. Good evening. I'm Kathy Kennedy. I'm the Senior Outreach Manager for Peconic Land Trust, and we welcome you to our series of Zoom presentations. It's been pretty interesting so far this year to recreate our in-person activities as virtual programs, so I hope you've been enjoying them. Topics covered so far have included conversations featuring local farmers, chefs, and producers of specialty items, the present and future of horticulture on Long Island, local artists' connection to conservation and their art, and how to be tick safe on Long Island, which was our most recent program in September. Tonight, we're excited to introduce you to 3 people as well as our moderator, all of whom will share their expertise to help you better understand the value of native plants in your landscape. With this information in hand, we hope it will inspire you to look differently at your landscape as you plan changes in the places you garden. Thank you all for tuning in, and we want to give special thanks to our panelists and our moderator. I hope that you're doing well and staying safe and healthy, and from all of us at the Trust, we wish you the best and are grateful that you're choosing to spend some time with us this afternoon. On a housekeeping note, you are muted during the conversation, but at the end, we'll be answering questions from the audience. So use your Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to post a question, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible at the end. So a little bit about Peconic Land Trust before we get started. As you may know, the Trust was founded in 1983 with a mission to conserve Long Island's working farms, natural lands, and heritage. And with your help, as well as the support of thousands of individuals, partner organizations, foundations, community groups, and all levels of government, we've been able to accomplish a lot. We've protected over 13,000 acres of land, including thousands of acres of natural lands, wetlands and shorelines, meadows, woodlands, and forests, and even a public garden, Bridge Gardens, that provides for respite, habitat for wildlife, and protection of our water for drinking, fishing, aquaculture, and recreation. In addition, with your support, we've helped conserve over 6,000 acres of farmland that is available to farmers growing food and many other agricultural products. For today's panel, we're happy to have Rick Bogusch, Garden Director at the Trust Bridge Gardens, Brian Smith, Vice President of the Long Island Native Plant Initiative, and John Witzenbocker, a beekeeper and owner of Sag Harbor Honey with hives located on the North and South Forks, including Bridge Gardens. Our wonderful moderator today is Jessica Damiano, contributing garden writer for Newsday. And Jessica is a local gardening coach, a master gardener, community educator, and author who for 15 years wrote Newsday's award-winning Garden Detective column. She enjoys working in her garden on the North Shore of Nassau County, where she grows perennials, vegetables, and sometimes weeds. You can find out more about Jessica's work and subscribe to her weekly gardening newsletter at jessicadamiano.com. Before I turn the program over to Jessica and our panelists, a final reminder on the Q&A. Please use the button at the bottom of the screen to pose a question to the panelists, and we will again be returning to those questions at the end of the formal program. And with that, I turn it over to Jessica Damiano with our sincere thanks.
You're muted, Jessica.
Yep, we're muted.
Thank you. My dog was barking, so that was for the greater good. Hello and welcome. We're here today to talk about an extremely important topic. And the good news is it's growing in popularity as more and more people are recognizing its importance. And you're among them. So thank you for attending and joining us today. As we'll learn today, it's quite possible that our very existence depends upon an understanding of native plants. But before we delve into all the details and the minutiae that we're anxious to learn from Rich, Brian, and John, true experts in their fields, really, I think we first should define an important term that sometimes has different meanings for different people, just to ensure that we're all on the same page and can get the most benefit from the information that's going to be shared here today. So the most important and the most basic question for me today is, what is a native plant?
Is this being open to anyone to respond to?
Yes.
Yeah, why don't you start, Brian?
So Long Island Native Plant Initiative defines a native plant as one that was quote unquote born here. It's ecotypic to this region and therefore is better adapted to our growing conditions. Now we have a guest on here, Nancy from Nebraska, and I would hope that Nancy from Nebraska is using plants that are indigenous to Nebraska for her gardening purposes. But for our purposes, we should be sticking to the things that were born here. That seed is encapsulated with the genetic implant to grow a certain way, to respond a certain way. And that is a huge benefit to a homeowner. We really can't afford to waste our resources trying to grow a plant that doesn't belong here. So growing native has a great way of reducing water needs, fertilizing needs. They are kind of self-caring plants once they get growing. And that's my version of a native plant, one that was born here and under its own growing conditions.
Rick, do you have anything to add?
Well, I would say we're a little bit less strict here at Bridge Gardens about what is native. I think we would define native as a plant that's naturally found in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic states, as well as plants, native to Long Island, of course. A lot of plants that you can find on Long Island have tremendous range. I think of red maple, which can, run from Canada down to Florida. Of course, a lot of the southern plants will not be hardy, say up at the northern end of the range, but a lot of plants are very, very wide-ranging.
Yeah, and I would think of the natives as, all those that are here pre-European. I think of pre-European as native.
I just wanted to respond to something that Rick said, and it's a good point. Red maple has the largest north-south distribution of any plant. What makes that kind of interesting is red maple is one of the first trees to leaf out in the springtime. So if you have a plant that was cultivated in Georgia and that's shipped up to Long Island, there's a good chance that when that tree breaks bud in the springtime and it's hit by an early frost, it might kind of do some damage and play a long time in catching up to where that red maple should be in the game. But, it is what it is. I don't have a problem. If you have to resort to buying that situation, please do so. But that is a concern about having a native plant that was not produced, where you are locally.
Good point.
Okay, thank you so much. Brian, we'd like to start with you. Again, Brian is the Vice President of the Long Island Native Plant Initiative, and he's going to be sharing with us some of the best trees and shrubs that we should consider for our gardens.
Okay, just give me 1 second. You know what, I might have to have somebody else start because I don't see my presentation here just yet. 1 second.
Okay, just let us know.
Rick, do you want to start talking about maybe about Bridge Gardens and then give Brian a chance to?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'll give Brian some time.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
I was going to talk about native plants at Bridge Gardens, their history of them, and certainly I invite everybody here to come see what we have. If not this year, as it's getting late in the season, then next year. There were a few natives when the land trust was given Bridge Gardens in 2008, but in the gardens themselves. But there certainly were some notable exceptions throughout the property, including all the white pines on the north and south borders, some of which are over 60 feet tall now. A specimen white pine, a large one that's in the inner garden, a large sweet crabapple that is near that white pine, American hollies, bayberries, and a forest of mixed oaks, red, black, and white, as well as hickories and beech. Also very, very tall, and I think one of the best features of Bridge Gardens. They really provide a wonderful backdrop for everything else. And of course, as Brian, I think we'll talk about, oaks are one of the, the best species to have to feed the low end of the food chain, and that can then work its way up. I think Doug Tallamy talks about oaks being host to over 500 insects that are again feed all the birds that spend the summer here and winter here too. About 5 years ago, we adopted a new collections policy here that favored natives. Before that, we basically practiced right plant, right place, and with that policy, we planted many non-natives. Since then, we've been adding new woody and herbaceous plants that are native every year, and replacing some, but not all of the ones the non-native ones that we planted before. I'd say many of the natives provide not only food for local wildlife, but also for humans, like black chokeberry, elderberries, pawpaw, blueberry, and butternut. I guess currently we're trying to use natives in traditional ornamental ways, substituting natives for non-natives in garden situations. But in the future, I think we'll adopt a more uncontrolled approach as we establish more natural habitat gardens. Right plant, right place still applies to natives. Not every native will grow everywhere. Amount of sun, soil type, and soil moisture are important considerations. And many of the plantings that we've done are experimental to see how these native species do in a garden situation. In my opinion, natives and native plant gardens still require a fair amount of maintenance, not the least of which is removing non-natives. I spend a lot of my time digging out Boston ivy, porcelain berry, bittersweet, sweet autumn clematis, and others, and other trees that somehow find their way in, that are actually planted by the birds, which seem to enjoy them. I'd say over the past few years, we've planted dozens of native species, a lot of grasses, a lot of sedges, and a lot of native ferns. And in our new parking lot, we've been using some of our favorite native trees and shrubs, including red oak, eastern red cedar, American holly, winterberry holly, and inkberry. Brian, have you gotten your
I think I am good now.
back? Why don't we go with you?
Is this on the screen?
I think so, yes.
Okay. So native trees and shrubs in the home landscape. I just want to kind of give a little background on how we got here. So this photograph dates back to approximately 1910, the start of the Long Island Expressway. This is when the landscape kind of starts to become fragmented. You're isolating populations of animals that can't move freely across the roads anymore. And you're kind of tearing out the landscape and backfilling it in a certain way. This is the start of suburbia, Levittown. William Levitt created this for the returning GIs to start their families after World War II. And it was also did something kind of interesting when all that plant life was removed for housing. We backfilled it with lawn. Now, this was a concept that was brought over from England and France. We had these, which had very vast green lawn spaces, but they also used sheep to mow those lawns. So in America, we started with fertilizer, weed control, pest control, lawn mowing, water resources. And it was also the start of backfilling properties with foreign ornamental shrubs that were going to now impress the neighbors. You're going to see the start of lilacs, hydrangeas, azaleas, rhododendrons, and the Kwanzaa, the cherry trees, ornamental cherry trees like Kwanzaa and Yoshino. And this guy, the Norway maple, the #1 shade tree in North America. It was started here in the late 1700s by a famous horticulturalist in Philadelphia, I forget his name, but it was brought over here to be used as a tree to plant out in the pasture for farm animals to get into the shade during the heat of the day. It was also promoted in the village squares, so a lot of the townspeople were also able to get out of the shade. Now, elm trees became a very popular street tree up until Dutch elm disease wiped them out. Well, and there's some still surviving today, but not the way that they were years ago. And Norway maples were now brought in to replace those elm trees to become the new street tree. This is the American chestnut tree. This was also wiped out from a blight back in the late 1800s. It actually started outside of the New York Botanical Garden in the Bronx. American chestnut was the largest provider of food for wildlife. They produced every single year the same amount of nuts, and they were edible right out of the husk. When that tree became blighted and kind of disappeared, oak trees and hickory trees were now the next ones to come up to provide that food for wildlife. However, oak trees, they don't produce acorns regularly. We go through mass years with them, where they produce a great deal of acorns, and as part of their survival to feed a predator and starve a predator the next year. It guarantees their survival that not all acorns will be eaten, but will eventually become a tree. So before we kind of get started on a lot of these plants, I do want to address something. Scientists have recently coined this term plant blindness, the inability to see or notice the plants in one's own environment. Tree identification was an important skill that was handed down from one generation to the next. And we kind of lost that in this time. So please pick up yourself a nice book. This is a really nice book to have on your shelf or to bring with you on a nature hike. I hope you're visiting trails. And if you are, this is a great book to have on hand to kind of thumb through and see if you can match up what you're seeing. This is another book that I'm very fond of, Essential Native Trees and Shrubs of the Eastern United States. This offers companion planting ideas for a lot of our trees, what shrubbery can go with them and where. Be forewarned, this is for the Eastern United States, so you are going to see recommendations for, from Florida up to the Mid-Atlantic. Of course, this is the book that started, a lot of us who became bitten by the native plant movement, Bringing Nature Home by Dr. Doug Tallamy. And probably no secret that, no surprise that monarch butterfly was the inspiration for a lot of people wanting to get involved with native plants. The monarch butterfly is host specific to laying eggs on milkweed. It's the only plant that the caterpillar will eat and turn into a butterfly, a monarch. So let's get started. This is a Tallamy landscape plan. What you're seeing here is on the outer perimeter, the use of the native plants. Well, I like to use native plants in my perimeter. That's where you can have a really great effect because you need to have green corridors for small mammals and birds to maneuver through your property and hopefully link up with other green corridors too. Within that area, they are going to find places to, things to eat, places to nest, quick escape from predators. And we're kind of losing that to PVC fencing and, good fences make great neighbors, but we're also creating a sense of sterility in our yards. And we need to get these plants back in there to provide more habitat. So Rick had mentioned before, this is the oak tree that supplies the greatest amount of insects or food for our migrating songbirds. There's over 500 caterpillars in there, of varying degree, but there are 500 species supported by oak trees. Oak trees are divided into two classes. There's oak trees, this is the white oak, and red oak. Now within the oak trees, you're going to find the greatest amount of diversity. And this is chestnut oak. If you have someone in your life who really wishes they could have an American chestnut on their property, this could be a good substitute because with a little imagination, those leaves do represent or, look pretty darn similar to an American chestnut. And it's going to produce acorns to feed our wildlife. And this is willow oak, part of the red oak tree class. Named because those blade-like leaves are very similar to willow trees. I have a neighbor where my family lives in Maryland who has a gorgeous willow oak tree, and I've noticed a couple of falls. There's no real leaf litter on the floor under this tree. When it falls, it just kind of floats away. It's very interesting, and it's a nice way of not having to rake everything, just kind of let the leaves fall and scatter as they may. If you ever have a chance to go to Bayard Cutting Arboretum in Great River, they have a few willow oaks in their collection, and it's nice to see these trees in their full maturity to get an idea if you can have one on your property as well. So if you ever had an oak tree sapling just kind of pop up and there's no oak trees nearby, blue jays are the greatest dispersers of acorns. And it's pretty darn amazing that the amount of acorns that they will bury on your property, more than likely they forget where they planted them. So what's going to happen is either in the springtime or the fall, those acorns are going to start to germinate. You're going to have an oak tree and you can either transplant it or pull it out. If you do decide to keep it, make sure you want it where it's growing because the taproot that comes out of an acorn can get very far deep into the ground and you're not going to have much luck moving it after a certain point. So if you would like an oak tree, look around your property. You might have a free one courtesy of a blue jay. So the hickory trees that we were talking about earlier, Rick was mentioning that they are on the property of Bridge Gardens. This is the next provider of food for wildlife. This is pignut hickory. In this illustration, if you could look in the bottom left under that tree, you will notice a pig. Early colonial hog farmers noticed how much their pigs were enjoying the hickory nuts, and they named this tree pignut hickory. The hickories are actually really stunning this time of year. Their golden color is really noticeable in the landscape. The other hickory tree I wanted to mention is shagbark hickory. Now, if you look at that on the right, there is a long strips of bark kind of peeling off of there. That is indicative of its name, but also that's giving hiding places for insects to overwinter to survive the next spring. But those trees are also going to be visited by woodpeckers looking for a little meal to get through those cold winter days. So we also want to think about how these trees interact with other organisms. And this is and they're very tall trees. If you can support one on your property, do so. Otherwise, you might want to look for something a little bit smaller. American basswood or American linden is probably one of the nicest trees hidden in plain sight. This one escaped my radar for a very long time, but once I identified it, I see it all over the place. And I'm sure John could attest to it that this is a bee tree, that in the springtime, there's lots of little flowers up there. I've yet to really see them or smell them, but there's a lot of bee activity that goes on inside an American basswood. It's Also a very strong tree. I've seen it stand up very well in storms. My neighbor has one planted. It's a beautiful specimen. And I think due to its pyramidal shape, it doesn't succumb to wind damage as much as other trees. So this is a really nice tree. It can get quite large, but if you have room, it's a really nice addition to your property. So gardening for wildlife, the native black cherry tree supports the life cycles of 456 moths, caterpillars, and butterflies, and 33 species of birds. Some people consider black cherry to be a bit of a weed tree. It is fast growing. It can have problems with certain diseases, but it's quite worthy of, being planted on your property. In the springtime, it's covered in these amazing white flowers. I don't find them to be especially fragrant, but it's an important food source for early foraging bees. And here's a picture I located of a person who planted theirs at the end of their yard next to the street. So it is something that you can easily work into your landscape, mixed in with other trees. So birch trees are also another one highly sought after by our songbirds. The problem with the birch trees is, well, especially the white paper birch, it's just simply not cold enough here for them any longer. So you may want to look for a different one. This is sweet birch, Betula lenta, providing great fall color, and it also produces catkins that are sought after by mammals. But I think the years of us having white birch trees is kind of over, and we might better suited with other ones. You could also look into river birch. So here's the red maple that we were just talking about. If you do have a Nori maple, if you have the means to remove one, you can still satisfy your desire for a maple with the red maple, Acer rubrum. These are really beautiful trees. Unfortunately, the red color is not year round. And unfortunately, it's not even, it's almost like it's up to the individual tree if it will turn this color. I have one in my front yard that just goes from green to kind of reddish brown, then the leaves drop. But I've seen really glorious displays of red this time of year. And unfortunately, it is up to the individual tree as opposed to being species wide. So now we're going to talk very briefly about understory trees. These are the ones that are smaller and live under the larger canopy trees. This is American hornbeam. It is kind of an unknown tree. This photo was taken at Wertheim National Wildlife Refuge in Shirley. What I like about American hornbeam is inside those trees are wonderful little V-shaped crotches for birds to find places to build nests inside of. So instead of going large, maybe you can go a little bit smaller and think about one of these. This is a cousin to American hornbeam. This is American hop hornbeam. It's the same story. It's a very strong wood. It goes by the name of musclewood as well. These are good for anchoring corners. Like I saw a very nice one planted in next to a swimming pool. So it anchored the patio really nicely, and it doesn't really get much larger than that. This is one of my favorite trees, and I think everyone else has a real capacity of love for this tree. It's the Eastern Flowering Dogwood, Cornus florida. What's nice about the Cornus florida is in the springtime, we have the beautiful white flowers, but in the fall, we are treated to the red berries in there. Well, actually, it's the songbirds and the squirrels that are treated to the red berries. What is so important about these berries is that berry is filled with important lipids and proteins to give a migrating bird a very strong start with a nutritious meal. And that's kind of what we have to understand, is that when we start importing other trees that don't have the same nutritional value, something gets kind of lost in there. And what's really important is to provide nutrition. This is another really beautiful tree. Some people also consider it to be a weed tree, sassafras. Sassafras also has an annoying way of creating these colonies. So there's probably one master tree in there that sent up suckering roots, and that whole tree system took over. And right now, this time of year, they're putting on an amazing display. I've never seen so many colors on one tree before. So hopefully you're visiting a lot of parks and refuges to see sassafras in action. They're very popular on the side of the road as well. So one of the cool things about sassafras is they have 3 different shaped leaves on one tree. You go from glove to mitten to oval shape. And it's also the alternate host for the spicebush swallowtail butterfly. Now, if you look at the illustration, there's 2 little caterpillars that are doing their best to look like little snakes. It was an evolutionary protection to kind of create a look that I'm a snake, not a caterpillar. Don't eat me, I'm off limits. Now, under that, the illustrator also put in, by those fruit drupes right there, That is a chrysalis that the caterpillar will curl up into. And you might find some still attached to the trees this time of year. And they'll emerge when the weather improves next spring. Serviceberry is another one under the understory, and talking about how tree knowledge, tree identification has kind of eclipsed us anymore. Serviceberry, early Native Americans noticed that when this tree is in bloom, the shad are now swimming in the rivers, and it was a great time to go fishing. So keep your eyes on this one. You know the weather's getting better when serviceberry starts to flower like this. They also have a really delicious berry that is edible for humans, but the birds are probably going to get to them before you do. They taste like a very intense blueberry. If you find it, it's delicious. I can't say enough about it. Unfortunately, I can't have one on my property because I have an eastern red cedar, and it is an alternate host for cedar rust. So this one is off limits for me, regretfully. The last tree I wanted to mention in the understories, you've probably seen this on the side of the road. This is staghorn sumac. It's another one of my favorite trees. Those leaves are probably a really brilliant red right now. And those red fruits on the top there are very sought after by overwintering birds as well. So sometimes we see things on the side of the road, they get a feeling of being, that's too common. I can't really have that on my property. But you probably could very, very nicely. And anything that does sucker, you're free to remove and just have the master plant because it really has a very beautiful architecture to it as well. So Rick had mentioned before, American holly. This is a very popular tree on Fire Island, the Fire Island National Seashore. It is very well represented in the Sunken Forest. If you haven't had a chance to visit the Sunken Forest, please go over there. It's a really great experience. It's synonymous. It's a tree that's synonymous with Christmas, with the red berries. And those red berries are very sought after at the end of the winter when birds are looking for a next meal. I have a friend in Patchogue who calls me up around St. Patrick's Day every year to let me know that a flock of 50 robins just descended in her tree and are eating every berry on the tree. And that's wonderful. You want those birds to eat these berries because they're going to fly away, drop that seed way off in the distance when they poop, and a new tree is going to form. Another favorite tree is eastern red cedar. This is another common tree that you'll find around the shorelines on North Shore and South Shore, and the Fire Island National Seashore as well. This is just a stalwart of Long Island. It is a very tough tree. You will need a male and female to have that tree produce berries, but a lot of the times the pollen will travel distance enough to fertilize a female. This is also really nicely planted with American holly as well, if you're looking for a nice screen buff. And honestly, I don't think a lot of people plant evergreens enough, especially come the fall. We don't want to be bothered with leaves. I get it. So enter in evergreens. They can really ground your landscape and provide a real good winter interest. And they complement a lot of deciduous trees as well. So very quickly, we're going to talk about shrubs. We do have native blueberries on Long Island, and they don't require any extra fertilization, no extra species that need to go in with them. This is Vaccinium corymbosum, high bush blueberry. And we also actually have what's known as low bush blueberry, which means they really just grow lower to the ground. The berries are still edible. Wildlife is probably going to consume them faster than you will. But this is an option for people looking for ground cover. People are looking to get away from Pachysandra, get away from Vinca, and with a little imagination, a nice carpet of low bush blueberry could be something kind of cool and different. The other trees that are really underrepresented, I feel, are viburnums. This is Black Haw viburnum. This can be a very large tree, a large shrub to kind of combat a small tree. And a lot of birds will seek nesting refuge in there to build a nest and raise a family. And at the end of the season, they will berry up and be a source of food for migrating songbirds. Same thing with this one. This is Nannyberry viburnum. These are both different varieties of viburnum that you could try. A lot of times the berries of the viburnums need to be touched by frost to be edible for birds. So those berries will stick around for quite a while until they're consumed when their berries are more appetizing. So winterberry holly, we were talking about that before as well. This is in the holly family. It is it's a really wonderful tree. I can't have this one on my property. I tried a couple of times and the deer just browse it down to nothing, but it really is a lovely tree. And a lot of nurseries don't sex the trees. So I would suggest if you're in a nursery and you see a winterberry, Look to see if it's in flower, because if it's in flower, you are going to get a wonderful display of berries come the winter time. So one of the things I want to leave you with, here's your takeaway, is that birds require insect protein for raising young. And this is the list of trees that provide the most amount of caterpillars for those songbirds to raise their young. So I hope you'll, peruse that list, maybe think about adding one to your property, and then think about adding in, go the rest of the way and adding in more natives in the form of, you have your trees, you have understories. Think about native grasses and think about native flowers, because those are the ones that are going to help out our pollinators the most, which John is going to talk about next. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So we know what the birds are looking for, and John, beekeeper, is going to help us understand what the bees need and what we can do to help them in our own gardens. John?
Yep. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about is plants that feed and support insects, and in particular bees. So as we discussed before, native plants are those that occur naturally in a region in which they evolved, and they play an extremely important role from an ecology perspective. So that's the relationships, let me go back, of organisms to each other and to their physical surroundings. And without natives, the insects that co-evolved with them, such as local birds, could not survive. Natives are more favorable in supporting local wildlife. And simply put, native plants feed the creatures at the bottom of the food web, which then provide meals for creatures on the next ring of the web. They tend to be naturally adapted to local growing conditions and require fewer inputs, such as water or fertilizer. And as we said before, reduced maintenance tends to equal more time enjoying your yard rather than working in it. So we all kind of mentioned the entomologist from the University of Delaware, Doug Tallamy. In his book, he talks about the link between native plants and wildlife. And he says that native insects cannot and will not eat non-native plants. And that when these native plants disappear, so too do the insects. And it impoverishes the food sources for birds and other animals. And we did mention this before about the oak trees and the caterpillars. And in one of the examples he provides, he talks about the ginkgos, how they only feed 5 different species of caterpillars. And just to see how important that is, he says that it takes 6,000 caterpillars to raise 1 brood of chickadees. And that's a significant difference. Mm-hmm. So typically nurseries, carry only species of plants that are available from other countries. However, that trend is changing. I mean, there's more than 60 people on this call right now, which means that, people are interested in natives. So, they're going to carry what people want. And these native plants not only sever the food web, but they also outcompete, native species and degrade the habitat along in this process. So just to tell you a little bit about myself. So I got into beekeeping because of my my interest in gardening. As my interest in gardening evolved, I started to plant fruit trees, and I learned that you needed bees kind of to hold everything together. And so the honeybee is actually Apis mellifera, which is the European honeybee. So honeybees are non-native actually, but New York State is home to approximately 420 species of bees. And the honeybee is kind of championed, obviously because of its gift of honey, but they do provide a tremendous value from a crop perspective in the United States, and the FDA estimates that their value is more than $15 billion per year. And how you translate that is that 1 out of every 3 foods that American eats are the result of pollination due to honeybees. And the reason why honeybees are important is because they demonstrate what's called floral fidelity. And what that means is that when these bees go to forage for food, they'll seek out one specific type of forage, and they'll continue to forage that until that source is then depleted before they move on to the next. And honeybees are social insects. They live in colonies containing over 50,000 bees, but social bees are kind of unique rather than being the norm. Social bees represent only 10% of the bees that are out there, where a majority of them are solitary. And what that means is that the female bee will live in a nest. They'll go out and they'll collect nectar for their brood, and they might only lay 12 eggs per year. Also, what's important is that the honeybee is unique in the sense that it could forage for a great distance. They typically travel 2 miles from the hive. They can go up to 5 miles from the hive, but these small solitary bees typically forage less than 1,000 feet from their nest. So, bees are not the most effective pollinators, and actually some people say that they're very inefficient. I did mention, how remarkable they are because they can go for a great distance. But, my goal and our goal here is to empower you, basically with the tools to plant the right things in order to support local pollinators that can thrive right in your own yard. Just to give you a little bit of feedback, what specifically these bees are doing. So bees collect pollen and nectar. Nectar is a carbohydrate, where pollen is a protein. In the case of the honeybees, they collect this nectar, which they then convert into honey. But pollen really is the main thing here, and pollen is their main source of protein, and it also provides bees with fatty acids, minerals, and vitamins. And pollen is necessary for hive growth and to be able to rear brood, which are young bees. So basically, what does this all mean? It means plant native, because planting native supports the local ecosystem, and it provides pollen and nectar sources throughout the growing season. Planting clumps, it allows bees or other pollinators to be able to more readily find their source of food. And planting different colors, because different colors attract different pollinators. Honeybees in particular, they like purple, pink, white, yellow, and also too, if you can supply a source of clean, fresh water in your yard. Having water in your yard doesn't necessarily translate to mosquitoes. Mosquitoes, it takes between 4 and 7 days for there to be standing water to equal, mosquitoes in your backyard. If you supply fresh, clean water, this could be in the form of a bird bath, that you put gravel in the bottom, or maybe you put corks in it that the bees could float on. As long as, you agitate that water every day, you're not going to have this standing water, and you won't have mosquitoes. And then also know that, typically speaking, 60 to 8% of bees nest in the ground. So maybe you might want to consider keeping a patch of dry, bare grass in your yard, and know that it takes 1 entire year for a complete life cycle for there to be bees. So, you make your yard very attractive that they want to move in, and then it's going to take a year for them to actually establish themselves. I also do see that people, like they advertise, these kind of like birdhouses for bees, mason bees, things like that. So you could put that in your yard. And I often see that they have these birdhouses for the bees, which have different size tubes, which will attract different bees. But just know that these artificial nests tend to attract more non-native bees and parasites than the natural nesting areas. I'm not saying don't do it, because I think it's great, but just realize that is something that could happen. And then right here, I think we could put this onto the website, but I tried to put together a list of different trees or shrubs that will bloom throughout the entire year, so that you always have a constant source of food that's available for bees. I went through things that are considered natives, and there's things that are blooming basically every month. So we did talk about the red maples. I put in there a different, bulbs that will come up. We talk again about the hollies that are in May, the blueberries. I also have on there the tulip tree. The tulip tree is very unique because when it actually flowers, that tulip flower is the only flower that a bee will then visit, completely consume the nectar, be completely engorged, and then have to return back to the hive. So that's very unique. Also, what's cool, what's an interesting plant is, like we said, the lindens, which then are in June. The milkweed, which is in July, and just realize that like we're planting these different things, but what we're gonna bring is then bugs, and bugs are not a bad thing, So like you'll have the butterflies that visit the milkweed, but then you'll see that your milkweed will then have these little eggs on it, which then turns into the milkweed bug rather. We have a buttonbush tree. Sorry, let me go back. The sourwood tree, I believe that's the lily of the valley tree. That's actually a beautiful tree. It's not very large. I think every yard could accommodate something like that. Bee balm is there. That's wild bergamot. And then in August we have other things. Joe pieweed, not necessarily the best for the honeybees, but you'll just see that swarmed by all kinds of different pollinators. September I put a non-native, but sedum will attract a lot of different pollinators. Also to go back there, in May I did put a oak leaf hydrangea. I know a lot of people love hydrangeas. That's a very adaptable tree. If look, I understand people like hydrangeas. That's something that will then provide a lot of pollen. And basically then to go back to October, we have all the different asters, which is a great source of late season pollen and nectar for bees, as well as, one last thing in November, you have the witch hazels, which will provide, food for the bees before the winter. And then this is just a list of different, common invasive plants and maybe what their alternative might be, so just take a look at that list and people plant non-natives because, they're beautiful or there's things that are attractive, but, all of these different things that I have on here, they're made for the bees. There's the wow factor there, so they're very attractive and you can have that alternative and still support, native pollinators. So, non-natives are not the answer. There's other solutions here. So, and I believe that's
wonderful,
it.
John. Thank you so much.
You got it.
And I just wanted to thank all three of you and also let you know, I want everyone to know that the lists of these plants, John, Rick, and Brian have all supplied their favorite plants and the plants that they spoke about during this presentation. And they're all going to be available at peconiclandtrust.org in a couple of days. So check back maybe 2-3 days and all the resources will be there. We are running out of time. So unfortunately, we're not able to get to the few questions that we've received, but please do visit peconiclandtrust.org. And thank you all so very much for attending. I think that this was very, very informative and very helpful to me as well as to everybody who attended. Thank you.
Hi, Jessica. We're only about at 10 to 5, so we can go for another 20 minutes. So why don't you, if you want, ask a couple of questions. We can do a few of the questions. That would be great.
Thank you. Okay. So we have a question, and the first question is, how does climate change affect native plants? There are more severe and extreme seasons, and we have less moderate temperatures. Maybe any of you can just jump in and answer if you know the answers, if you want to contribute rather.
One of the things that I wanted to mention about climate change is, trees are slowly marching northwards. I'm not prone to recommend the tree that's growing in the south to like, hey, let's start planting it here. I don't have a science background for that. So I think we need to let science kind of say what would be appropriate. And we could be a few years away before something from the south really needs to have a foothold up here. So I think one of the good things about our native trees setting up to climate change is a lot of them are very resilient. recently with Tropical Storm Isaias that came through. I don't think that was really a hurricane. That was a windstorm that really browned out a lot of trees. And because they're adapted to that kind of exposure, they were going to rebound a little bit faster. They turned brown and crunchy, but those leaves were going to come back and the trees were going to survive. So planting native is kind of like a resilient way to combat climate change.
And Gloria Frazee asks, this is a question for Rick. Rick mentioned all the time that he spends digging out non-natives, but he also mentioned that birds like some non-natives. So should I be digging up non-natives even if the birds like them?
On your property, I think you can. We're surrounded, you know, in the periphery, on other areas around Bridge Gardens. That's where all the non-natives are, and they provide the source for all the ones that end up on the property. So yeah, I think you can.
Thank you. And Suzanne Home asks, will we get a list of these trees after? And yes, lists of plants, like I mentioned before, will be on peconiclandtrust.org. Gloria Frazee also asks, the biggest area in my yard is lawn. We stopped spraying and fertilizing years ago, but the next step is to get rid of it and keep growing the buffet for wildlife. Do you have suggestions for lawn-like areas?
Lawn-like areas. Well, you could replace the lawn with other grasses, native ones like little blue stem or northern dropseed or agrostis. You know, those don't necessarily have to be mowed. Tall fescue is a great lawn substitute that can be mowed, or you can choose not to mow it. It never gets real big. We have a no-mow area here at Plantations that is mostly fescues, a few other species, and you know, we cut it down maybe once during the season and once at the end of the season, just to discourage voles. But
And
yes.
if you have the means, I would suggest working with a professional, because I've come across a few stories that replacing lawn can be a pretty daunting task, and it could kind of be something out of frustration if you don't do it correctly, or you know,
Ways of doing it. Yes.
yeah.
Thanks. Jackie Donlin asks, I have a plot that was populated with second growth after lumbering, predominantly white and black oak. Because of the hollow primary stump, the 2 or 3 secondary growth trees are continually breaking in windstorms or rotting at stump junction, or from erosion due to deer paths. What trees would you suggest for replanting? The lot is getting very bare. The soil is acidic, sandy clay, and the property does not get a lot of sun. It's in Springs, New York.
Well, I don't understand why oaks wouldn't work out there, because my impression of Springs is that it is mostly oak trees, you know, mix of red and white and black, and I would stick with those. The Eastern red cedar might be a good tree also, though that's not necessarily deer resistant. At least when it's young, it's not deer resistant. But I would try to repopulate with oaks, even if you have to plant new ones.
And then complement the oaks with understory trees like the dogwood.
Yes, you could do that too, yes.
Gloria Frazee asks how to go about designing a long-term landscape plan with native plants that I can work toward so there's an intelligent design. There are so many options. I feel as though I'm in a paint store looking at thousands of paint chips. I live in EH. I guess this is East Hampton Village.
That's a very good point. I think people do bite off more than they can chew in the beginning, and you can kind of get overwhelmed, very quickly, and it could look horrible. So definitely taking your time. I think the winter time is a really good time to go to the library, take some books out, and kind of sketch out what you want to accomplish. Maybe start small, like maybe a 10 by 10 area is not terribly difficult. And I would fill that up with some common orange butterfly weed, some swamp milkweed, maybe some fall blooming things like asters, maybe some little blue stem to kind of give support to things. Yeah, it is hard, but definitely you're doing the right thing by being more pragmatic with your approach. And again, if you can hire a professional to work with a professional, that might be a good way to go as well.
And Suzanne Holm has a few questions here. The first is, where can we buy these trees?
Well, there are, many nurseries, I think, and more nurseries are selling native trees, and there are a couple native plant nurseries in our area too.
I would
So-
contact LI Natives in Eastport.
Okay, it's LI Natives. Is there a place on Long Island where we can see a hornbeam hedge?
So you can see a hornbeam hedge at Bayard Cutting Arboretum, but I'm pretty sure that it's the European hornbeam.
Yeah.
But it's going to be very similar, and it really is very stunning. But I've never actually seen the American hornbeam hedge, but it might be the same comparatively to the European cousin. So that's an option.
Okay,
think
and this, I
American
believe, was a question.
hornbeam is hard to hedge. It can be done. We had a hedge collection at Cornell, and that one was never very satisfactory. It's much better to let it just go as a natural tree, I think.
So this is, I think, a question for John. And will you share the substitution of native for non-native plants? So I think that's something that we could put up on the website as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, we'll in a couple of days we'll have a recording of the presentation, and we'll collect all the resource information and make that available through links on the website as well.
Joe Keim asks, are there nurseries in this area where we can obtain some of these native plants?
So I did see somebody just post something in the comments that there was a place in Southampton, and I'm not sure if that Long Island Natives place is open to retail. That might actually just be wholesale, the one in Eastport. But I don't know if you guys know of any other ones.
So LI Natives is, you could probably email them or submit an order over the phone. But you're right, they're not retail that you can just show up and peruse what they have. I would go through the website and place an order. Long Island Native Plant Initiative, we just had our plant sale. We don't have a full collection of woodies, tree species, but we did have a good selection of milkweeds and asters and goldenrods. So you can keep an eye on us for the coming season. We might have more in 2021.
Barbara Fontanetta asks, I know heavenly bamboo is a problem for cedar waxwings. What are some other non-natives that are dangerous to wildlife?
That's a really good observation and question. A few years ago, down in Georgia, the cedar waxwings depleted all the berries in the vicinity, and they descended on a patch of heavenly bamboo, and it's toxic, and it wiped out an entire flock. I don't think it's poisonous just to that species. It's probably poisonous to all bird species that are looking for it, because a lot of times if they're desperate enough, they see a red berry, they're going to eat it. Mm-hmm. That's the only case that I've heard of that happening to. The other one that I would think about is taxus, the yews. There was another anecdotal story about there was a college professor talking about native poisonous plants, and as he was giving the talk, a deer came out and ate the yew and died on the spot from eating the red berry. So these things do happen, and they're just something to think about. I've never heard of birds eating the taxus, but I just wanted to clarify that story about the heavenly bamboo.
Thank you. I'm glad we had some time for questions after all, but now we really are running out of time. So Rich, Brian, and John, thank you so much. This was very, very informative, eye-opening, and fascinating. And I'm sure that everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. And thank you to all the attendees for making time in your day for such an important topic that can really guide your gardening for years to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us as well from the Land Trust. We appreciate the time you spent with us. And thank you to our panelists and our moderator for the great work that you did today in preparing as well a wonderful presentation that hopefully enlightened a lot of folks and will encourage them to plant native and to reach out to us. We will have all the information, as Jessica said, on our website, on our blog. We'll have a recording. And also, you know, when you go there, you'll notice the blog. We have a lot of other recordings on there from other Zoom programs we've done this year. So hopefully you'll take some time to enjoy those as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.